The conviction of Lucy Letby was an entirely circumstantial one. No one denies this. Indeed, those that still bizarrely believe that this is a safe conviction typically advocate for the power of a circumstantial case. But how powerful was a circumstantial case used against Lucy Letby? Centrally important to the entire prosecution case in the trial of Lucy Letby was a shift chart that prosecutors claimed demonstrated beyond doubt that Lucy Letby was always on duty. However, there are numerous problems with this assertion. The selection of cases for this shift chart was fatally flawed, with the collapses and deaths of other infants on the unit never factored into the equation. Statisticians now state unequivocally that the shift chart is utterly unreliable and of no validity or evidential value. Recently, 8 separate statisticians approved a column authored by Dr. Philip Hammond in Private Eye, in which he outlined several of the key problems with the chart used in court. It is now also known that Lucy Letby was not even on shift or present for several of the collapses depicted in the chart. On top of this, there are several incidents in which it is not contested that Lucy Letby was either surrounded by colleagues, present in another nursery, or never the designated nurse for the infant. If there was a retrial of the Lucy Letby case, on the very first day of the trial, any defence barrister could call numerous statisticians from the Royal Statistical Society and completely trash the chart in front of the jury. It would be completely impossible for the prosecution to identify even one statistician who would defend the chart. This is critically important because the prosecution relied on the theory that Lucy was always on duty throughout the court case, and many inferences were made from this. It is not particularly surprising that the chart has little merit, considering that it was a combined effort by the esteemed duo of Chester Constabulary and Dr. Dowie Evans, and was never touched by the hand of any remotely qualified statistician. Indeed, when Cheshire Police, to their credit, commissioned work from Professor Jane Hutton, the Crown Prosecution Service curiously informed them to cancel the study, and Hutton was never involved. As both the police and the Crown Prosecution Service have studiously avoided answering questions on the topic, we don't know why this work was cancelled. What we do know is that Professor Hutton has become a critic of the prosecution case since the trial was concluded. In conclusion, the shift chart has the approximate value of a Zimbabwean dollar. Another key factor in the prosecution case was a green note found in the Chester residence of Lucy Letby, which was purported by investigators from the Cheshire Constabulary to be a confession note. This whole allegation centred on one phrase included in the note. However, the context of this expression clearly indicates that Lucy Letby was expressing her guilt at not being a good enough nurse. This not good enough phrase was even repeated in a text message shown in court, as well as during police interviews. Furthermore, the content of the note is not remotely consistent with the assertion that it's a confession. There are, in fact, far more statements indicating innocence than anything pointing to guilt. The note also looks nothing like a confession note, and there is no meaningful reference to anything related to murder, nor any details whatsoever. This is consistent with all materials recovered from the residence of Lucy Letby. Finally, it has been well established and documented that Lucy Letby wrote this note as part of a counselling exercise. Another note recovered from the residence of Lucy Letby, which has barely been referenced, is a blue post-it note which contains a critical phrase indicating innocence. It is noticeable that this note is much calmer in tone than other notes and clearly predates Lucy's arrest or any explicit suspicions from police. Despite the fact that the police are investigating the hospital, Lucy is extremely calm about the situation and states that there is obviously no evidence against her. It is important to reflect that if she had murdered babies, she would firstly know that there could easily be evidence against her, and secondly, wouldn't be so calm about the whole situation. Lucy also mentions that the police haven't found any evidence that anyone else has done anything wrong, which also indicates innocence, as if she were guilty, then she would know that they have done nothing wrong and wouldn't be concerned with her colleagues' well-being. Similarly unperturbed by the police presence, Lucy then goes on to mention an occupational health meeting with Catherine de Bager, who would then recommend her to write the other notes. This blue post-it note has barely been mentioned anywhere, and its publication on the BBC website is one of the extremely few useful things that the BBC has done in relation to this case. It is important to note that this particular note has a strong indication that Lucy believes herself to be innocent. The question to ask is, why does Lucy believe herself to be innocent? And the answer to that question is because she knows that she's innocent. Moving on to Lucy's diary, let's keep this as short as possible. I have made a video already on the supposed code contained in this diary. Please do feel free to watch the whole video. However, we can also cut to the chase here. There categorically is not a code in Lucy's diary. What has been presented by Cheshire Police is, frankly, utterly laughable and cannot possibly be described as a code, even if it had any foundational consistency, which it does not. Lucy Letby was also accused of making supposedly chilling Facebook searches for parents of infants involved in the case. Firstly, this is no indicator of guilt. There are prosaically obvious reasons why Lucy might look up parents of infants who have been treated on the unit, particularly if she had been through traumatic experiences with them. In usual circumstances, this would seem to be perfectly normal behaviour, but in the trial of Lucy Letby, not least because the prosecution had no concrete evidence whatsoever, it was forced to rely on this hodgepodge of nonsense, which was the circumstantial case. Leaving the issue aside that these Facebook searches have no evidential value at all, it is also notable that there were 31 searches for names related to the case, compared with 2,287 for names not related to the case, i.e. searches related to the case constituted 1% of Lucy's total searches. This clearly indicates that what she stated in the witness box, that she often searched for people on Facebook, was undeniably true, and that these searches for parents had no particular relevance or significance. Nursing handover sheets were also infamously discovered at Lucy Letby's property. Both the police and prosecution claim that Lucy kept handover sheets as trophies, noting that some of the handover sheets contained details related to patients that she was alleged to have harmed. However, it has long since been established, and was indeed discussed in the trial, that the vast majority of handover sheets found at Letby's house were completely unrelated to the case. The only one that was in any way treasured was her first ever handover sheet, which she kept in a keepsake box with a rose. This wasn't mentioned in the court case, but considerable effort was made to suggest that Lucy Letby did somehow value handover sheets related to alleged crimes, even though this makes absolutely no sense and is unsupported by evidence. It is also notable that there were no handover sheets found for 9 of the 14 infants on which Letby was convicted, further weakening the notion that there was some sort of meaningful pattern involved. Furthermore, when advancing their inspired trophy theory, Cheshire Police didn't readily mention that they found several of the handover sheets in a bin bag in Letby's garage on the verge of being thrown in the rubbish. Not really the actions of someone who treasured those handover sheets as trophies. It is also worth noting that it was asserted throughout the trial that there is no way that a nurse could innocently take home handover sheets, which does not correlate with the assertions of many working nurses. Indeed, Lucy herself provided precisely this explanation, that she'd taken them home absent-mindedly, by accident, during her police interviews. They're just sheets that have inadvertently come home with me in my pocket. I've not emptied my pockets before coming home, Lucy told the police. When providing its verdict on Letby's application to appeal, the Court of Appeal acknowledged that she provided explanations for the various strands of circumstantial evidence, and acknowledged that only 21 of those handover sheets related to babies on the indictment. In fact, not only are there explanations for this so-called circumstantial evidence, but it doesn't have any value in the first place. A competent police investigation would have rapidly and emphatically drawn this conclusion. The prosecution also attempted to create a compelling case around the movement of nurses on the unit. This involved the collection and analysis of swipe card data. This was always spectacularly flawed anyway, but since the trial was completed, it has emerged that Cheshire Police reversed swipe card data for 9 infants in the case. Furthermore, it is known that there was a staircase into one of the nurseries on the unit which didn't have a swipe card system, invalidating all of the data immediately. However, the prosecution was aware that this data had no value anyway. During the cross-examination of Lucy Letby, because the swipe card record didn't support an allegation that the prosecution wished to make, prosecutor Nick Johnson commented that colleagues could have held doors open for her. This, of course, applies to literally all of the swipe card data that was used in court. None of it is reliable. This has just been tacitly conceded by the lead prosecutor. Certain aspects of the hospital record system, referred to as Datix entries, also formed part of the prosecution case. It is notable that when I have asked neonatal nurses to analyse the Datix information available, they have all concluded that Lucy was extremely diligent in this area. This entirely correlates with what nursing managers on the unit stated in documents submitted to the Thirlwell inquiry. It should also be noted that the prosecution made allegations that Lucy Letby had fabricated certain Datix entries. This is absolutely and categorically an invention of the prosecution. It is, in fact, their own fabrication. There is literally no evidence that this ever happened, and the prosecution didn't attempt to present any evidence. This entire portion of the court case involved a narrative that was literally fictional and a series of hypotheses that were all invented. Not only was there no concrete evidence to support this whatsoever, but there was no circumstantial evidence either. This was, purely and simply, an invention of the prosecution. To this day, neither the police nor those that prosecuted Lucy Letby could provide one iota of supporting evidence for their position. Numerous text messages were also displayed in court. None of these had any useful information, nor did they contain anything even remotely incriminating. The text messages were trivial to the point of being banal, simply containing everyday conversation, the manner of which would take place on any neonatal unit. Commenting on this, the police noted that the vast majority of messaging that they'd recovered was remarkably normal. Indeed, this also applied to the text messaging that was displayed in court. Eagle-eyed investigators from the Council of Chester also failed to notice that they used text messages in court that corresponded with explanations and language used by Lucy Letby previously, which they had rejected. Sympathy cards sent by Lucy Letby to parents were also cited as somehow sinister. This was a particularly despicable part of the trial and prosecution case, in which the lead prosecutor attempted to turn what was simply a kind act against the defendant. There is simply no basis for this, it was transparent smear tactics. The conviction of Child K required an eyewitness account from Dr. Ravi Jairam. Indeed, this was the only evidence presented for this prosecution. But this account is now looking pretty shaky, considering that firstly it was initially based on Jairam creating the new concept of catching someone virtually red-handed. Secondly, he backtracked on this statement during the Thirlwell inquiry, and thirdly, emails have now been unveiled which indicate that Jairam had previously given a completely different account of events. Since this emerged, Sir David Davis has written to the Cheshire Constabulary requesting that they investigate Dr. Jairam for perjury. Finally, there were an array of eyewitness accounts utilised during the court case. It is my opinion that this was deeply inappropriate and manipulative. However, regardless of this, what can be stated beyond all doubt is that no one ever witnessed Lucy Letby doing anything untoward on the unit, and no one can test this. In summary, the anecdotal evidence used in the court case of Lucy Letby all falls into four categories. It is either worthless, wrong, deliberately misleading, or more than one of the above.